Amid the devastated backdrop of a fallen dynasty, the royal guard born a slave has fallen, loyal to his last breath protecting a mad emperor who sold his soul to the devil, leaving behind a haunting question: will he be remembered as a loyal knight or not? Or in the end, was he just a foolish loser, one who failed to see the currents of the era? But to Cain Layer himself, the emperor's guard, neither title offered him satisfaction. "Why did you draw your sword at the last moment?" a voice shouted in anger, preferring to vanish from everyone's memory instead. That voice belonged to the rebel leader, Halo Reston, his closest friend, shouting in despair, "Cain, you fool." Yet Cain only smiled contentedly, for as an orphan who had lived 29 years, he had made his own choices, and this was his final one. Halo still could not accept it. He screamed through tears, "You could have escaped. Why choose this path?" Pain turned into ultimate anger, and Halo could only shake his friend, who was fading away, screaming, "Cain! Open your eyes! You bastard, wake up!" Amidst the sea of flames, Halo held tightly to his closest friend, his desperate calls of "Cain" ringing out. And then, as Cain's eyes slowly dimmed, the last thing he heard was the painful curse of his dearest friend. In the eternal realm, Cain's footsteps lightly advanced upon an endless water surface, a solitary journey into the world beyond. Amid the boundless galaxy, he questioned himself whether this was the death he had chosen. He revealed a satisfied yet hollow smile. It turned out that the freedom he had longed for was nothing special after all. A sad smile briefly crossed his face as he recalled the image of his close friend Halo, who had sobbed uncontrollably because of him. But he quickly brushed it aside, believing that Halo would manage on his own, and now was the time for him to enjoy this freedom, just as a strange blue light appeared. That light immediately caught Cain's attention, a spark of curiosity flashing in his eyes. However, that small beam suddenly exploded into a massive space rift, violently engulfing everything. Overwhelmed, Cain's consciousness gradually faded. All he perceived was utter astonishment. Then, when he opened his eyes again, a stranger with blonde hair was smiling at him and calling him Karen, causing Cain's soul, now in a newborn's body, to feel bewildered. That man, his father in this life, then turned away and asked another person, "Sir, would you like to hold him once?" The rough hands of an elderly man reached out to take the boy, his warm voice praising the child for being so tough and not crying, while the soul of Cain inside was only stunned, wondering what on earth was happening. Then, when he clearly saw the man's face, Cain was stunned. It was Halo, though much older now. It was certainly him, his closest friend who had now become his grandfather. The shock was so great that the newborn, for the first time in both of his lives, let out a loud cry, causing the entire family, especially Grandpa Halo, to feel embarrassed. In his mind, Cain screamed helplessly, completely unable to accept this cruel situation. The horror was finally confirmed by an undeniable truth: he had been reincarnated as Halo's grandson. Time swiftly passed, and 45 years after the death of Cain later, his story was now recorded in the kingdom's history books. In classrooms, he was praised as a symbol of absolute loyalty, the one who stood by his master until the very last moment. And after such a lecture, the history professor turned to his student and asked, "Young master, what do you think about this?" That young master was none other than Cain in his new body, lazily propping his chin with his hand and turning the question back on the professor. The professor could only offer a general assessment that perhaps Grand Duke Halo simply wanted to restore the honor of his late close friend, as their friendship was quite well known. With a sharp gaze, Karen unexpectedly asked the professor in return, "Do you really think so?" leaving him quite bewildered. The 10-year-old boy then presented a shocking argument: "I think my grandfather still harbors resentment toward his deceased friend, which is why he deliberately gilded that name." The professor went pale, cold sweat breaking out, utterly unable to believe that such disrespectful words could come from a child. Karen explained clearly that his grandfather could not accept Cain's choice of death over walking the revolutionary path alongside him, so he disregarded his friend's wish for a quiet death, and turned him into a hero. The concept of a quiet death stunned the professor. It was a perspective he had never considered before. His mind began to piece everything together, recalling notes that the final duel had ended too quickly, an illogical detail that now became terrifyingly plausible. While Karen calmly flipped through the book, the professor could only marvel at the sharp reasoning ability of a child just 10 years old. However, his admiration quickly turned to horror as he imagined being executed by the Knights of the Duchy for disrespect should he dare agree with this thought. Seeing his professor stammer, Karen calmly turned a page of the book as if nothing had happened. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, Karen laughed out loud at the professor's frightened expression, revealing that it had all been a clever prank of his. Then the boy burst into laughter, saying he was just joking, leaving the professor still shaken by what had just occurred. After the lesson, he strode along the corridor, telling himself that from now on, his name was Karen Reston. Currently, he was the youngest grandson of the Duke Reston, and after some time, he had finally grasped the irony of this situation. Anger flared up again as he thought about that foolish close friend who had taken it upon himself to make him a hero, something he had never wanted. Karen's train of thought was interrupted when he caught sight of a man lost in deep contemplation. It was Pale, the youngest son of Halo Reston. He was also, in this life, the father figure to Karen, whom Karen had to clear his throat to pull out of his own musings. Startled, the father turned to greet his son, and Karen immediately realized he was praying again. Karen bluntly asked if his father was still worried about his upcoming awakening ritual. With a troubled expression, the father could only offer an apology, prompting Karen to calmly ask, "For what?" The sad father explained that unlike his two uncles, he had never awakened his magical power, and he feared that burden might have been inherited by his son. Karen then placed his hand gently on his father's shoulder in a comforting gesture to console him. With a warm smile, he said, "No matter what anyone else says, to me, you are still the greatest father." The son's sincere words deeply moved the father, causing his cheeks to flush red. In an emotional moment, he embraced Karen tightly and replied, "And you are my most wonderful child." Overcome with emotion, the father pinched his son's cheek affectionately, while Karen could only endure it with a reluctant expression. After this warm family moment, the father invited him to dinner, and Karen did not hesitate to answer immediately that he wanted to eat meat. That night, a magical stone hovered in Karen's room. He lay on his bed, staring at the stone and reflecting on the awakening ritual that his father had been worried about. These thoughts brought him back to memories of his previous life, when Kane himself had once been curious and asked Halo about this ritual. Looking back, Halo explained that it was simply an ancient family ritual used to unlock latent magical power. Kane, from the perspective of a commoner, merely mocked the idea of this innate power, considering it something he never cared about. Halo patiently explained further that not everyone can awaken magical power, and even if they can, it doesn't guarantee the position of family head. Then he revealed an even more fascinating detail, an earth-shattering secret passed down to the leader of the clan. Kane's curiosity finally stirred. He guessed it might be a great treasure or a dark magical tome granting wishes. But then, he returned to his true nature, saying that what he was really interested in was just a peaceful life in a remote place. Halo couldn't help but laugh at his friend's modest dream, which made Kane angry because he felt mocked. Halo had to yield in the face of his best friend's anger. With a bright smile, Halo promised that one day when he became family head, he would definitely specially reveal that secret to Kane. The memory of that old promise ended, bringing Karen back to reality, where he was sitting alone by the window, reflecting on that very awakening ritual. Returning to his private room, a surge of blue magical power erupted around Karen as he told himself, "Father, you don't need to worry." The boy stood there, radiating a strong aura far beyond his years. With a confident smile, he affirmed, "I completed the magic awakening ritual long ago." Some time later, Karen's family was at a magnificent train station, preparing for an important journey. The first time in both his lives seeing a magical train, Karen could not hide his amazement and excitement. His mother revealed that much of the technology used to build this train was funded by his father, prompting Karen to exclaim, "I knew it." The gentle mother winked at her son, affirming that what his father did was truly wonderful. Karen looked at his father with eyes full of admiration and pride, sincerely saying that he was the best father. And it's true, although he couldn't awaken magic, his father was a business genius who alone carried 30% of the finances for the entire Reston Duchy. With a devoted father for the family and a mother always gentle and kind, Kane finally had the perfect family he never dared to dream of in his previous life. With a contented smile, Karen silently thought that these truly were perfect parents. Then the train set in motion, carrying his small family toward the ancestral home of the Reston clan. The boy silently gazed out the window, his mood becoming complicated as they drew nearer to the place of destiny. Suddenly, his eyes were attracted by something far off. It was the main mansion of the Reston family, a magnificent and grand fortress. This place is known as the Blue Sea Fortress, Qinghai City. Karen's expression hardened, he knew that there, he was waiting. Halo Reston, his old close friend, the enemy who killed him, and now his grandfather. Now, Karen, with the soul of Cain, would have to face him. A challenging and dangerous smile bloomed on his lips. So, you've turned me into a great figure of history. The father's eyes were full of astonishment as he saw his son suddenly radiate a completely different aura. He couldn't understand the strange expression and the meaningful smile on the boy's face. Inside him, Cain's soul was screaming an oath. If Halo wanted to turn him into a hero, he would become the opposite. The boy Karen clenched his fists tightly, declaring with a proud smile, I will become the worst scoundrel of the Reston family. His eyes fixed on the distant castle, silently challenging, just wait, Halo. The train sped forward, carrying Karen's message, your precious youngest grandson is on his way. Before long, the train arrived at the Blue Sea Fortress station. A butler was already waiting, bowing respectfully to welcome his family. His father, Count Pale, politely greeted the butler named Heinrich. But Karen's attention was caught by the escort knights, the High Lang Knight Order, individuals exuding a completely different aura. He thought to himself, have they realized I've awakened mana? Their level truly is on another plane. Karen knew that soon this news would reach him, but he didn't care at all. Afterwards, the whole family was led inside the main castle by the butler Heinrich. You were led to the waiting room by a maid, while your parents went to greet the elders of the clan. Karen couldn't help but marvel at the luxury of this place, even the guest room was so spacious. Feeling bored, you looked outside and wished you had asked to go to the library, just then a laugh echoed behind you. Another blonde boy appeared, mocking Karen just as rumored, arriving and immediately demanding to go to the library like a bookworm. This cousin continued to sneer, saying that with your father's bloodline, the chance to awaken magic was very low, so it's best to focus on studying or earning money like a commoner. The insult to the father you respected made Karen unable to stay seated. He clenched his fists tightly and stood up, much to the cousin's surprise. Blue magic power flared around his hands as Karen growled challengingly, come on, then, leaving the cousin astonished but hastily gathering his magic to respond. With a glint of magical light in his eyes, Karen remarked, oh, so there's a mad dog being raised in this main house too, huh? Overwhelmed by the surge of magic, Cousin Leo could only stammer fearfully, you can't be, how is that possible? Karen smiled smugly, revealing that he had awakened long ago, a secret even his father didn't know. He suddenly changed the subject, saying that now they had a more important issue to deal with. With a cunning smile and shining eyes, Karen declared, this family doesn't need two mad dogs, and I will take on that role, so could you just step aside? Leo was completely panicked by Karen's insane declaration, shouting, asking what the hell he was talking about. A dark shadow with a sinister grin appeared behind Karen, and he concluded bluntly, in short, it's time to get beaten, cousin. Leo could only stand frozen, utterly overwhelmed by his cousin's intimidating aura. Meanwhile, in another room, the elders of the family just received the news, so he has awakened already. Butler Herrick confirmed to Halo's 3 sons that all 3 captains of the night squad had sensed the young master Karen's magical power. Raffle Reston, the second young master, immediately showed suspicion, believing that Pale's concealment of his son's awakening of magical power must be part of a conspiracy. Pale, Karen's father, could only helplessly explain that he himself was completely unaware of this matter. Eldest young Master Tails Reston spoke up to ease the tension, saying it was understandable that Pale did not sense his son's magical power. But Raffle just snorted coldly, clearly rejecting the explanation he considered pathetic. Their tense argument was cut short by a servant rushing in, calling out loudly for the chief steward. The servant's face was full of panic as he stammered, unable to speak clearly. All 3 young masters turned around, curious about what had caused the commotion. The servant finally spoke, pointing and calling out, second young master. Pale hurried to his elder brother Raffle's side, trying to explain that there must have been some misunderstanding. But Raffle no longer heard anything, his face darkened, full of fury at the news he had just heard about his son. Bursting into the room, Raffle was stunned when he saw his son, Leo, with a swollen face lying unconscious on the sofa. Seeing his uncle appear, Karen still calmly bowed politely in greeting. But before he could finish speaking, Raffle grabbed him by the collar in a fit of rage. Raffle roared, questioning Karen why he dared to do such a thing, while Pale, Karen's father, rushed over to intervene. Amid the chaos, Karen calmly replied, "Because Leo insulted my father." He looked his uncle straight in the eyes and asked sharply, "If the person insulted was your father, would you stand by and do nothing?" That question was like a dagger to the heart, causing Raffle to freeze speechless. Still, his anger overcame reason. Raffle brushed it off, believing Karen was merely making excuses. He turned and poured all the blame onto Pale, claiming it was all because he failed to properly discipline his son. Just as the brothers were about to erupt into a fight, the chief steward Herrick arrived in time and ordered everyone to stop. The butler announced that the master of the house, namely Halo Reston, would be the one to judge this matter. Following his father's order, Raffle had to angrily release Karen. His father hurriedly rushed over to support him, anxiously asking if his son was all right, and Karen calmly replied that he was fine. Amid the tense atmosphere, the whole family proceeded together to meet the master of the house. Karen obediently followed his father, but thought silently to himself, "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" The entire group strode down the long corridor toward the most powerful man in the clan, with only the words "Halo" echoing in Karen's mind. As they entered, a deep and authoritative voice rang out. Sitting behind his desk, Halo looked directly at his nephew whom he had just met again and got straight to the point. "What reason did you have for causing such a big incident as soon as you arrived at the fortress?" Pale, Karen's father, tried to explain on his son's behalf, but was immediately cut off coldly by Halo. Halo's gaze remained fixed on Karen as he said he wanted to hear the answer from him directly because he believed Karen was not someone who acted without thinking. Though secretly mocking his grandfather's tolerant attitude, Karen still began to explain the reason behind his actions. He bluntly stated that it was because his cousin Leo had insulted his father, which made Raffle immediately shout from behind that it was a fabrication. But Halo slammed the table and roared, "Silence," causing the entire room to tremble. He sternly scolded Raffle for daring to raise his voice in front of the family head, causing the second son to bow his head in apology. Halo then ordered the butler Herrick to call Leo over for a confrontation. But before Leo arrived, Halo turned back to Karen, his sharp gaze indicating he had another matter to ask about. As he had anticipated, Karen happily replied that if his grandfather wanted to ask about magic power, he had awakened it 3 years ago, surprising everyone. Halo continued to question why he had hidden this, even from his own father. Karen innocently explained that he had initially only discovered it while reading a book. With an undeniable look of amusement, Halo leaned forward and asked, "And then what happened?" With an innocent smile, Karen explained that he simply wanted to keep it a secret for fun, and it would be even more amusing if the knights in the territory remained unaware. Halo felt a bit disappointed and asked if that was really the only reason, to which Karen beamed and confirmed. At that moment, the butler announced that young Master Leo, their cousin who had just been beaten, had been brought in. Leo entered, his entire face wrapped in bandages, the result of his exchange with Karen. Halo immediately asked Leo if it was true that he had insulted his uncle, leaving Leo momentarily embarrassed. But before Leo could answer, Karen put on a perfect performance, beginning to sob as he recounted the terrible things Leo had said about his father. He even repented by saying that even so, he shouldn't have hit his brother, while Leo behind him was only scared and tried to deny it. With tears welling up, Leo was completely panic-stricken by Karen's accusations, which were exaggerated with added embellishments. Karen turned around, throwing Leo a look as sharp as a knife along with a powerful fist, a silent threat that frightened Leo to death. Unaware of the silent drama unfolding behind him, Halo solemnly looked at Leo and asked one last question, "Is what Karen said true?" Under the pressure from his grandfather and Karen's threat, Leo could only tremble as he admitted it. Halo rubbed his temples, seemingly having grasped the entire situation. He decided that since the awakening ceremony was set to take place the next day, the punishment for both would be postponed. After everyone had withdrawn, Halo privately asked the steward Herrick about his thoughts on his grandson. The steward replied that while he was uncertain about other aspects, he felt the boy had many interesting qualities that could attract the master's attention. Halo agreed. He also found the boy very intriguing, not only because he had awakened magic himself 3 years prior but also because he had kept it secret until now. Moreover, he realized Karen's complaint about the knight was a subtle hint that Halo had underestimated his son who lacked magical power. Although Herrick thought he was overthinking, Halo still affirmed that this child was completely different. He believed that if Karen truly had something special, then everything would become clear tomorrow. After all, awakening to magical power was not everything. Halo wondered whether his nephew could complete the ritual smoothly and, if successful, what he would receive. Under the moonlight, he admitted that he was extremely curious about the outcome. That night, deep within a secluded forest in the Reston clan territory, an important ritual was about to take place. A trail led deep inside, toward a place emanating a mystical blue light. At the heart of the forest was an ancient stone altar, upon which rested a slab radiating magical power. This slab was the centerpiece of the ceremony, a treasure of the clan. The entire forest was engulfed in absolute silence, preparing for the upcoming rite. Under the leadership of clan head Halo, all the clan's key members entered the forest. Accompanying them were figures cloaked in robes. These were the elders of the Reston clan. Karen sensed that although these individuals had retired into seclusion, the powerful aura they emitted was by no means ordinary. His gaze fixed on the elders, clearly sensing that each was an extraordinary master. Joining them were his eldest uncle Tails and his cousin Leon, as well as his second uncle Raffle and his cousin Leo. The presence of the entire clan in such numbers made Karen realize that this ceremony was even more important than he had thought. Finally, the entire group stopped before an ancient stone altar, the center of the ritual. Karen immediately recognized it. This is the Bloodstone Oath. Halo spoke solemnly, declaring the official start of the awakening ceremony. He explained that when Karen passed through the spatial gate opened by the Bloodstone, he would be transported to a world chosen by the stone itself. That world would be different for each person, and the ritual would only end when he used the weapon obtained there to destroy that very world. After hearing the explanation, Karen smiled and respectfully replied to his grandfather. Halo's eyes never left his grandson, observing his every move. He held up a pendant bearing the same symbol as on the stone, preparing to begin the ritual. When the pendant touched the Bloodstone Oath, a fierce magical reaction occurred. A giant pillar of light shot straight into the sky, creating a barrier that enveloped the entire forest. The magical energy grew increasingly powerful, transforming the quiet forest into the center of a storm of mystical power. A spatial gate began to form, causing Karen's father, Pale, to feel worried. Halo stood before the gate and asked his grandson, "What are you doing? Are you scared now?" The worried father placed his hand on his son's shoulder and asked once more if he was truly okay. Karen just smiled to reassure his father, promising that he would return soon. He turned his back on his family, faced the gate, and silently pondered his mission. Do I have to use the weapon obtained from the other world to destroy it? He curled his lips into a confident smile, thinking this mission was too easy. Since sabotage was his specialty, Karen didn't hesitate as he stepped through the dimensional gate. But just as he was about to disappear, Halo suddenly spoke, "Overcome your fear, Karen." That puzzling reminder made Karen turn back. "Overcome my fear." After Karen had fully entered, the gate slowly closed behind him, witnessed by the entire clan. He was swiftly teleported to a completely unfamiliar place. The desolate, ruined scene engulfed in flames left him stunned. This place is. Before him lay a battlefield littered with the corpses of knights. He walked among the fallen comrades, a heartbreakingly familiar sight. Then he realized the Bloodstone's challenge was forcing him to confront the memory of where he had died in his previous life. He was angry, believing this trial was trying to make him feel guilty by showing him the scene of innocent comrades who had perished. He looked up at the steps leading to the throne, the path where he had spilled blood in his past life. Suddenly, a mysterious voice echoed, calling him, "Son of Lam Lang." The voice continued, saying the moment of the covenant had arrived, and it was here to fulfill the promise made to his ancestors. A figure slowly appeared, its shiny shoes stepping onto a blood stain on the floor. Karen immediately recognized the nature of this being, a demon. The demon explained that the blood flowing through his veins was special, untouched by a low-level demon. It opened the door leading to the throne, urging him to overcome his fear to find what he yearned for. Karen stepped into the great hall, a place so familiar it moved him deeply, and thought silently, "Long time no see." He looked toward the throne at the end of the path, where something awaited, the throne that the Mad Emperor had sold his soul to the devil to protect. He walked along the path to the throne, feeling as if treading upon the bodies of comrades who had sacrificed themselves for a meaningless cause. The demon's voice echoed again, calling him the child blessed by the northern sea, the one whose soul had once been lost. It welcomed him on behalf of the blue tribe, and then Karen saw that thing on the throne. It was his sword from a past life, and the demon declared it was also his weapon for this trial. Karen was astonished to recognize it as the beloved ruined demon sword, a gift from the emperor long ago. The demon ordered him to infuse it with magical power, but Karen resisted, knowing the demon sword would corrode the wielder's soul. But it explained that the dark thoughts within the sword had long been purified by his grandfather, Halo. The demon asserted that only he could awaken it, but Karen still hesitated. His greatest fear rose, the fear of becoming a mindless puppet again, slaughtering countless lives under the emperor's orders. At that moment, the image of his father and his grandfather's words echoed in his mind, "Overcome your fear, Karen." He smiled, finally understanding everything, grasping the unusual kindness of Halo. It turned out that the true purpose of the ceremony was not to find a weapon, but for the heir to face and overcome his greatest fear. If that's the case, Karen no longer hesitated and decisively reached for the hilt of the demon sword. He grasped it firmly, determined to confront his own sinful past. At that very moment, a tremendous flow of energy surged into his body. Suddenly he was immersed in a space filled with azure energy, and realized, is this Lam Jiak? In the Lam Jiak space, the demon sword ruin was being cleansed by pure water. The demon's voice rose, saying it did not know why the sword appeared to him in this form. It revealed that this sword originally belonged to his clan's ancestor, Lord Rail. The sword that his grandfather, Halo, possessed was also the ancestor's sword, but his own sword was entirely different. Because the power it held was completely different from the clan's bloodline. The pain struck as the strange energy merged with his body, but Karen still gritted his teeth and endured. The demon explained that the magic of the sword was being imprinted onto his body. Despite the pain, Karen felt extremely excited, the magical power within him had become stronger than ever. He admired the purified sword, marveled at the power of Lam Jiak, and asked for its true name. The demon began to tell its history, a sword that had beheaded countless demons and devoured their power. A terrifying sword whose existence had been erased from history, born from the deep, dark, and pure northern seas. And its true name was, Soul-Severing Blade, Guillotine. Karen whispered that legendary name in astonishment. The demon said this sword was very much aligned with his destiny, prompting Karen to finally ask, by the way, who are you? He guessed that since it called itself Lam Tak, this demon might be Lam Long, the guardian spirit of the Reston family. But it denied that, saying he was not yet worthy to know its true name, and promised that if one day he could dominate the seas, he should come to the northern sea to find it. Karen silently accepted that full-of-meaning message. He asked how to get out of there, and the demon simply replied that he already knew the answer. Karen's eyes turned toward the decayed throne, and he understood everything. With an excited smile, he swung the guillotine blade up and shouted loudly, "Amazing, I've always wanted to do this." A slash holding the power of the blue horn and the full rage of a past life aimed straight at the throne that caused his tragedy. Meanwhile, outside, the entire family was still waiting, and worry was evident on Pale's face, his father. Halo turned to reassure his son, telling him not to worry too much. He said he understood, it wasn't easy to watch his son walk a path he himself had never experienced. Despite his worry, Pale tried to remain calm, knowing this was the time he needed to be stronger. But then, Leo was the first to notice something unusual from the Oath Bloodstone. He shouted in panic, "Grandfather, the Oath Bloodstone is cracking." Immediately after, the stone fractured and exploded in a dazzling burst of light. Halo could only cover his face, stunned and unable to comprehend what was happening. When the light faded, Karen had returned, standing amid the rubble of the Bloodstone with his new sword. He scratched his head in bewilderment, wondering if he had truly come back or not. His gaze then settled on the shards at his feet. With an innocent smile, he turned to the whole family and asked, "Hey, where did the Oath Bloodstone go?" That question caused everyone, from Halo to the uncles, to freeze in utter astonishment. The entire family could only stand there, staring at the wreckage, unable to believe their eyes. His father, Pale, was the most panicked. He shouted, asking his son what the hell he had done. But Karen paid no attention at all, he just turned to look at his grandfather with an innocent smile. Halo didn't notice Karen's attitude because all his attention was focused on the sword in the boy's hand. He recognized it with extreme astonishment, the soul-reaping blade, guillotine, the ancestral sword of Rael Reston. It was a legendary sword that had been erased from the family's history, surviving only through the stories passed down by family heads and elders. Why would such a long-lost treasure suddenly appear here? Halo looked at his grandson, and a bold speculation flashed through his mind. Could it be that the time of the covenant is drawing near? He decided to test the boy, asking if he was afraid of that sword. Karen, with a steady gaze and not an ounce of fear, boldly answered, "No, sir." Hearing his grandson's resolute reply, Halo simply smiled with satisfaction. He began to recount a story from long ago. About how their ancestors failed to fulfill the covenant with the Azure Dragon to eradicate the demons. They left behind the Bloodstone Oath as a testament to that covenant, entrusting a vow to the future. Waiting for the day when the Chosen One would appear to complete the unfinished mission. And now, Halo believed that Karen was the heir to that covenant. With that faith, Halo Reston raised his hand to the sky and began a solemn declaration. He declared Karen to be an official member of the Blue Sea Fortress, chosen by the soul-severing blade and worthy to inherit the Sea Spirit's secret art. This announcement caused a great shock, especially among the two uncles, who could not believe that a kid like him had received such an honor. Amid the chaos, his father hurried over to check on him, but Karen was absorbed in staring at the sword in his hand, lost in thought. The eldest son, young Master Tails, silently thought that he knew every weapon in the family but had never heard of this sword before. Just looking at it was enough to send a cold chill running down his spine. He stepped up to Pale and warned that although his son was walking a great path, he would never allow the succession to be shaken by a wild card like Karen. Halo then declared the ceremony over and ordered everyone to return home. But as they began to leave, Raffle called his eldest brother back. He angrily questioned Tails, "Are you really just going to stand there and watch like that?" Tails calmly replied that perhaps they would soon have a private talk. Raffle then directly asked his brother if he knew about the guillotine sword. Tails could only admit in disbelief that he had never heard of it either. Raffle clenched his fist tightly, unable to understand why Pale's son, the weakest one, was the chosen one. After the ceremony, the eldest Master Tails looked at his younger brother Raffle and said that the important thing now is that this is not the time for them to fight among themselves. Time passed, and the day came for Karen's parents to leave the Blue Sea Fortress. The father anxiously asked if his son would really be okay staying alone. But the butler Herrick tried to reassure him that there was no place safer than the Blue Sea Fortress. Yet Pale admitted that, although this place was safe from external threats, what he truly worried about was the threats from within, specifically from his own two elder brothers. Still, he comforted himself with the thought that perhaps with the presence of Grandfather Halo, they would not dare act recklessly. Seeing Pale's concern, Butler Herrick decided to share some important news with him. He revealed that the person entrusted with teaching and passing down the Sea Spirit's secret arts to Karen was none other than Miss Sabina, Halo's younger sister. This news made Pale breathe a sigh of relief, for if it was Miss Sabina, he could be completely at ease. Because Sabina Reston, Halo's sister, was a master swordswoman with skills rivaling her brother's. Karen also recalled her illustrious reputation, once known by the nickname White Wolf. Pale advised his son that Miss Sabina cherished him deeply, so he must be very respectful toward her. Butler Herrick then announced that he had a message from the family head Halo for Pale. Halo ordered a private mansion to be prepared for the Pale family at the fortress so they could visit anytime. The warm message from the stern father moved Pale to tears. Now, he could leave peacefully without worries. He gently stroked Karen's head, reminding him to take care. Finally, the train departed, taking his parents back home while Karen officially began a new life. He was escorted by Butler Herrick and the Sea Dragon Knights to the training grounds. Herrick urged him to hurry because Lady Sabina was waiting. But then he abruptly stopped, politely asking to offer him some advice. Karen agreed happily. The butler seriously warned that Lady Sabina hated being called Madam the most. Karen promised to remember this, though inwardly he wondered what was wrong with calling his great-grandfather's sister Madam. At last, they arrived at the fortress wall leading into the training area. Herrick explained that this was the training hall, a place reserved exclusively for the family's direct descendants. He added that young Master Leo was also present inside, which surprised Karen. The surprise quickly turned into a sly smile, as if Uncle Raffle had specially requested Leo to train alongside him. With that, he waved goodbye and quickly ran ahead. The old butler silently watched the small yet passionate figure as he disappeared. He smiled, thinking it had been a long time since this place was so lively. As he approached the cultivation chamber, a massive surge of magical energy radiated from behind the door. Karen stopped. He could clearly feel the overwhelming power emanating from within. At that moment, a commanding voice called out from inside, asking why he was still standing outside instead of coming in. Urged on, Karen pushed open the door and stepped inside, respectfully introducing himself. But the scene inside left him stunned. A beautiful young woman sat on the chair, asking if he was surprised because she did not look like what he had imagined. It was Miss Sabina, the aunt he had assumed to be an old lady, now appearing youthful and full of authority. Sabina remarked that she hadn't expected him to be the lovely son of Pale from long ago. How time flies. Karen, secretly terrified, guessed that she must have used magic to regenerate her body, a level befitting a 7-star knight. Sabina interrupted his thoughts, ordering him to quickly take a seat. She pointed to a spot beside his cousin Leo, who was cowering in fear at the sight of Karen. Karen approached with a friendly smile, saying that since they would be seeing each other often, they should get along. Sabina then said she hadn't expected to hear the title White Wolf from a child like him. He explained that he had read about it in a book, and Sabina commented that he truly was an interesting child, just as her brother had said. This piqued Karen's curiosity, and he asked what his grandfather had said about him. Sabina recounted Halo's words that, he is a child who will truly make others love him. But in truth, Halo's advice carried a much greater weight: help that child, so that one day he can rule over the entire sea. Halo's final instruction was, you must become the lighthouse of Karen, Sabina. Back in the present, Sabina observed Karen and sensed the boy's vast, boundless, and infinite potential. A potential like a vast ocean, a fierce wave yet to be tamed. But that is precisely the potential to one day dominate the entire sea. Sabina thought to herself, never expecting to meet such an interesting child at this age. She smiled with delight, perhaps this training would be enjoyable. Sabina stood up and began the first lesson, explaining that the lotus sitting posture is the most fundamental foundation for magic training. She said that once they overcome the beginner stage, they can practice without sitting down. To illustrate, she released a massive surge of her magical power and said, like this. The overwhelming power of an 8-star knight struck, leaving both Karen and Leo stunned. Karen immediately recognized it, saying, this is blue sea magic. Sabina began explaining the blue sea domination technique, a method of using magic to create and operate oceans within the body. When one can operate 8 oceans, they reach the 8-star realm, and when they unite them into one, that is the 9-star realm. She revealed that across the entire continent, only 3 people had reached that level, and within the empire, there was only one. That person, none other than, was your grandfather and also her brother, Halo Reston. That name ignited a flame of determination in Karen's eyes. He vowed, Halo, in this lifetime, I will surely catch up to you. Sabina couldn't help but be surprised to see the boy's intense desire for power. Her surprise quickly turned to delight, as she thought that he was truly an interesting child and would enjoy training him. Then, the official training began with the first lesson, to let the magical energy flow through the meridians opened up during the awakening ceremony. And her final advice was, remember, the power of the sea is not to be controlled, but to be accepted. Karen began to feel the magical energy inside his body like waves. Although still somewhat rough and fierce, he was starting to get accustomed to it. Each pulse of magical wave began to accumulate and spread out from his heart. Sabina was astonished by the scene before her. She couldn't believe this was the magical power of a child who had just completed the awakening ceremony. Even Leo, who had been taught the blue sea domination technique 2 years earlier, was only just beginning to reach the 2nd-star level. In contrast, Karen was already carving the magical meridians by himself, even though she hadn't taught him how to do it. That process made him feel a pain as if his body was being torn apart. Sabina realized that Karen had stopped on his own. She thought perhaps his body had begun to feel tense. But she was even more amazed to see that he didn't stop completely, but was merely adjusting his pace, an incredible ability to control himself. In contrast to Karen, Leo had overexerted himself and collapsed from magical exhaustion. Sabina hurried over, scolding Leo for not listening to her advice. She blamed herself for focusing too much on Karen and forgetting that, even though awakened, they were still just children. Seeing his cousin in such a pitiful state, Karen could only shake his head in disbelief. Sabina turned to look at Karen. She realized this boy was completely different. He could clearly recognize his own limits and stop to avoid harming his body. She was immensely amazed at the calmness and self-control of a child, no matter how much he thirsted for power. Sabina realized that a child like this probably wouldn't need a beacon to guide him. With a new determination, she seriously called his name. She made a promise: 3 years, within the next 3 years, I will ensure your safety. Therefore, focus on building your strength so you can protect yourself, and Karen did not hesitate to accept that offer. Time passed, and at the Blue Sea Fortress's training yard, the knights were earnestly practicing. A commander was sternly scolding them, demanding they swing their swords as if they were in a real battle. The commander stood observing with a sharp gaze. Just then, Karen and Leo arrived as well, and Leo couldn't help but feel worried when he saw Karen carrying the guillotine sword. Karen said irritably that he had to keep it in the scabbard his grandfather gave him because everyone said it had a terrifying aura. The commander from before approached and greeted the two young masters. He announced that from today onwards, he would be responsible for training Karen in swordsmanship. He introduced himself as Zera's Winter Guard, commander of the Sea Wolf Knights. Karen politely returned the greeting, secretly amazed because just a glance told him this was an expert of the 8th star level. But Zeras immediately set a condition that he would not call him the Duke's grandson until he was officially recognized by the Sea Wolf Knights. Karen calmly replied that this actually made him feel more comfortable. He said he understood well that the Reston family's tradition was to earn respect through true strength, a response that surprised Zeras. Zeras thought to himself, unlike young Master Leo, this kid didn't show any resentment. He began to wonder if a worthy heir had finally appeared. But Zeras did not know that behind that appearance was a burning ambition. In the end, they will all have to bow before me. The overwhelming aura radiating from the boy stunned both Zeras and Leo. The commander was horrified. Could it be that an even worse one has appeared? He thought to himself that a kid was even more dangerous than young Master Leo. 3 years later, at the Blue Sea Fortress, Halo was sitting and enjoying some wine. Sabina was also there, teasing her older brother about stealing their father's wine. Sabina irritably reminded him that she had spent a lot of effort teaching their nephew for the past 3 years. Halo smiled and acknowledged that 3 years had indeed passed. He then asked his sister about her impression of Karen after all that time. Sabina did not hesitate to give a brief comment: the boy is a monster. Halo just smiled wryly, but Sabina insisted that even calling him a genius would be an insult to him. Halo then turned to Zeras, the knight commander, to see if he shared the same opinion. Zeras affirmed that after 3 years of observing Karen, he completely agreed with Miss Sabina. He listed numerous strengths of the boy, from physique, talent, attitude to courage, all were excellent. Zeras even made a bold comparison, saying he felt Karen surpassed the heir, Hugo, who was hailed as a genius. This assertion astonished Halo, since Hugo was regarded as the Empire's most outstanding young talent. Sabina spoke up with a warning, saying that if not managed well, Karen's presence would cause big trouble for the family. She urged her brother to consider Karen's impact on succession and the reactions of his sons. Halo asked again if she was implying that his sons would become a threat to their own grandchildren. Sabina only said that Karen's appearance would definitely affect the successor and everything that would follow. Her sister's warning forced Halo into silence, deep in thought. Sabina continued, saying that with the blood stone shattered and the northern sea monsters increasingly numerous, could their family be facing extinction? Halo dismissed it, saying those were foolish notions. He revealed an ancient prophecy: the breaker of the stone shall raise a new stone, just as their ancestor once did. Sabina was astounded, and Halo confirmed it was a prophecy reserved only for the family head, signaling that the time of the covenant was drawing very near. Sabina just smiled, remarking that it seemed the little nephew's shoulders were about to bear very heavy responsibilities. Sabina asked when he intended to tell Karen the truth, and Halo replied only, when the time is right. Meanwhile, Karen was writing a letter to his father, apologizing for being too busy training to visit home. He updated on his training progress and teased that he was taking very good care of his cousin Leo. The letter ended with the familiar plea that he had run out of pocket money, making his father laugh. Pale told the butler Herrick that he still vividly remembered how worried he was when he left Karen here 3 years ago. Herrick replied that the boy had adapted astonishingly quickly, and thanks to him, the fortress was never quiet. Upon hearing this, Pale could only sigh, saying that he had warned his son many times not to stand out too much. Herrick comforted him by saying, "Gold will shine wherever it is." But he also warned that the situation was about to change, as they would no longer be able to hide information about Karen. Pale immediately understood, and Herrick confirmed that it was time for Karen to carry out his duties as a member of the Sea Wolves. However, Pale couldn't hide his concern that the two older brothers would not be pleased to see Karen's growing influence. Seeing this, the butler Herrick could only say one thing to him. That Miss Sabina deeply cherished young Master Karen, a statement that made Pale realize his son had a strong protector. He said that although he had heard Karen's stories through letters, having Herrick confirm it made him feel much more reassured. Pale even joked that perhaps the monthly allowance he sent to Miss Sabina had finally taken effect. However, he was worried that Miss Sabina would also soon have to leave the fortress. Herrick once again reassured Pale, telling him that he didn't need to worry about that either. Because Karen had built an extremely solid relationship with the Sea Wolf Knights, so much so that they had given him a nickname. Pale smiled, saying that he had also heard about that nickname. That nickname was, the Little Mad Dog of the Blue Sea Fortress. 3 years later, during a training session, Karen easily shattered the wooden sword of one of the strongest knights. His strength left the knight named Hans astonished. Hans quickly conceded defeat, but Karen was not satisfied. He scolded him for taking the blows so passively. He explained that the Hai Lang swordsmanship would become useless if overwhelmed by sheer power. He went on to criticize, saying that an adult like Hans couldn't be so weak. Hans could only laugh wryly, saying that probably only Karen would dare to mock his muscles as a deflating balloon. Karen just shrugged, saying he only spoke the truth that no one else dared to say. Hans admitted that Karen's strength had developed so fast that now he couldn't face him without using magic. He then changed the subject, saying it seemed Karen was about to be assigned a mission, news that instantly piqued Karen's interest. Hans explained that since the head of the family was in the capital, Commander Zeres would decide when to deploy the mission. Hans guessed that the upcoming mission might be to the Western Granary, where monsters had been appearing frequently. Upon hearing he had to go on a mission with Karen, Leo, who was training, immediately lost concentration. Nevertheless, he comforted himself by thinking that if he completed the mission well, his parents might be pleased. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Pale, Karen's father, was having a secret conversation with the steward Herrick. He handed Herrick a small bag and asked him to take a look. Pale explained that his inspectors found it in a merchant's cargo from the Bellis territory. When inspecting the contents, Herrick could not help but be horrified. Pale confirmed it was drugs and assigned Herrick a secret mission, to investigate the Bellis territory from the Blue Sea Fortress. Herrick remained silent, seriously accepting the mission. That night, a ship docked at the Blue Sea Fortress, signaling that a larger conspiracy was about to be unveiled. That night, a mysterious man stepped off the late ship. He looked toward the fortress and wondered, the Blue Sea Fortress. The entire fortress was immersed in the silence of the night. Only the footsteps of patrolling soldiers could be heard. But in a hidden corner, a shadow was stealthily moving. It was Karen, who had just borrowed a bottle of wine from his master, Zeres's collection. He thought to himself that, even in a child's body, he could not forget the taste of wine. But then he suddenly froze when he saw the silhouettes of two strangers. He overheard them talking about the Duke being absent and the Knight Commander temporarily taking control. Karen decided to appear, startling the two strangers who asked why he was out at this hour. The servant hurriedly introduced the stranger, saying he was Baron Rohan of the Bellis house, here on urgent business. Rohan greeted politely, saying he had heard of Karen as the son who awakened magic, unlike his father. Karen, still holding the bottle of wine, agreed to listen, despite the servant's suggestion to bring the guest to meet the cavalry commander. The boy argued that since the Marquis had personally come here, it showed urgent matters, so it was reasonable and appropriate for a noble to receive him. That sharp argument forced the servant to agree, and Rohan realized this kid was no ordinary troublemaker. Although still bothered by the bottle of wine, Rohan couldn't help but be impressed by the political judgment of a child. He could only wonder silently whether the entire Reston family was always like this. After that, the two moved to a private room so Karen could hear a summary of the issue. Karen confirmed the problem: a gang of bandits were occupying the eastern mountainous region of the Marquis territory. And since their appearance, drugs had spread widely and people were being kidnapped to be sold as slaves. Rohan continued explaining that because his territory was impoverished and lacked a proper army, his father had to lead a small force to attack the bandits. But they suffered heavy losses. His father was severely wounded and bedridden ever since. Rohan blamed himself, thinking it was all due to his incompetence. Upon hearing this, Karen slammed the bottle down on the table, startling Rohan. With a face full of rage, he growled, "Those bastards deserve to be torn apart piece by piece." But then he quickly regained his composure, pointing out an absurdity: how could a group of bandits withstand a regular army? Rohan proposed a hypothesis that perhaps they were deserters from the war in the southern kingdom. Karen immediately connected the dots, noting that the Imperial Army's focus on the south had created a security gap in the north. He concluded that the hypothesis that the deserters had become bandits was the most plausible. Seeing that Rohan was in low spirits, Karen slyly offered him a glass of wine. He explained that because Belis's territory borders his father's domain, this was not something he could ignore. He added that if possible, he would like to personally lend a hand, a remark that deeply moved Rohan. Karen then mischievously revealed that the bottle of wine was stolen from Commander Zeraz's collection, which horrified Rohan. Just then, Zeraz suddenly burst through the door, angrily asking if they hadn't agreed that Karen would no longer touch his wine. Realizing the presence of the young baron, Zeraz quickly apologized for his rudeness. He said he had heard about the bandits troubling Rohan's territory. Rohan confirmed that this was precisely why he had come, to request the Sea Ridge Knights to come to his aid. Zeraz did not answer immediately but instead snatched the glass from Karen's hand, scolding him for being too young to drink. He once again apologized to Rohan for making him witness such an unpleasant scene. Then, as commander, Zeraz affirmed that Blue Sea Fortress would not ignore the troubles of an old ally. He promised to soon organize troops to dispatch to Belis territory, news that made Rohan extremely happy and relieved. Upon hearing this, Karen immediately asked Zeraz to let him come along, but was refused because the enemy was a well-trained group. Rohan could only be amazed, never expecting a 13-year-old child to seriously want to participate in a dangerous mission. Zeraz acknowledged Karen's remarkable progress over 3 years, but he emphasized that real combat was an entirely different matter. Karen argued back, saying that overprotectiveness was not good, and that it was better to face a known danger than invisible threats. But Zeraz remained firm. He would not let him risk confronting an enemy of unknown strength. Seeing he could not convince him, Karen flashed a sly smile. "What if I make an offer you can't refuse?" The boy's unexpected proposal left both Zeraz and Rohan visibly embarrassed. At the same time, Leo could only utter a bewildered "why" in confusion. Then at the station, Karen succeeded. He threw his arm around his disheartened cousin and excitedly talked about their first mission. Zeraz could only watch them go, realizing he had been completely outsmarted by this little mad dog. Zeraz couldn't believe that Karen had even managed to drag Lady Sabina into this affair. Sabina thought that having a reliable protector accompany her was also a good thing. Zeraz also had to admit that Sabina's agreement showed she was satisfied with the children's training results. But Count Rohan still could not feel at ease, even though their companion was the legendary White Wolf. He feared that if the Duke's 2 grandchildren were harmed, his family would be held responsible. Zeraz stepped forward and reassured Rohan, saying that what he feared would not happen. He affirmed that with Miss Sabina's presence, the 2 young masters would not be in danger. But Sabina suddenly declared that unless the 2 children were about to die, she would not intervene, leaving Rohan and Leo speechless. Zeraz tried to argue, but Sabina cut him off, saying there was another reason behind her decision. She explained that there was a reason she could not act directly, a secret even greater than this mission. Zeraz had no choice but to accept Miss Sabina's decision. The train was about to depart. It was time for them to set off. Leo looked extremely tense before his first mission. Sabina noticed this and comforted him, saying that feeling anxious was perfectly natural. She encouraged him to see this as an opportunity to prove the effort he had made over the past 3 years, to be recognized as a member of the Sea Wolves. Sabina's words touched Leo's pride, a member of the Sea Wolves. Karen stood behind and gave a thumbs up to cheer him on. But immediately after, he teased his cousin, asking if he always needed someone else to push him. Once both were on the train, Leo looked at his younger cousin and thought to himself, I knew it. He knew that the day he had to prove himself on his own had finally arrived. The magical train departed from Blue Sea Fortress, heading toward the Bellis territory, officially starting the first mission of the two young heirs. Although determined, Leo couldn't help but feel anxious. He hadn't expected this day to come so soon. The train advanced into the cold land carrying a top-secret mission, beginning a journey full of surprises and challenges ahead. On the train, Sabina explained why her presence had to be kept secret, because if her identity was revealed, the bandits would immediately vanish without a trace, causing all plans to collapse. Under pressure, Rohan could only respectfully obey the orders of the one he revered as White Wolf, a title that reflected her extraordinary status and power. However, Rohan couldn't help but worry about entrusting the fate of his territory to two children, especially since Kazan, undertaking his first mission, appeared unusually calm, without any sign of tension. In complete contrast, Leo was extremely tense, his mind weighed down as his mother's harsh words continuously echoed, creating an invisible pressure bearing down on his shoulders. Amid the chaotic thoughts, Leo suddenly awakened, his gaze becoming more determined than ever as he realized the path he must take in the true relationship between him and Kazan. In Leo's memory, his mother had once angrily questioned why he could be close to Kazan, reminding him of an incident that happened 3 years before. She continuously insisted that Kazan was an enemy, not a friend, someone who had humiliated him and tarnished his father's honor, yet Leo could still laugh and talk cheerfully as if nothing had happened. With cold, sharp eyes, she scolded Leo as a man without any ambition, a weakling lacking the drive to strive. Finally, Leo mustered all his courage to face his mother, asserting that he and Kazan were not rivals, a statement that stunned her and marked a turning point in his own maturation. Leo went on to explain to his mother the gap in ability between him and Kazan, noting that even the praised genius Hugo only reached triple star level at 14, while Kazan had already attained quaternary star at 13. He boldly declared that Kazan might be a goal to strive for but could never be his rival, a statement demonstrating his deep self-awareness of his own position. His mother, unable to accept the truth, thought it was merely low self-esteem, but Leo firmly denied it, for he understood his true feelings better than anyone else. For Leo, Kazan's existence was not a burden but rather the greatest motivation, driving him to make even greater efforts so he could confidently walk his own path. Faced with her son's maturity and determination, Leo's mother could only sigh helplessly, realizing that the boy she once knew had truly grown up. She left him with one final piece of advice. Leo was seeing the tree but not the whole forest, a profound hint that he needed a broader perspective for his future. Back to reality on the train, Leo was startled awake from his reverie when Master Sabina called his name, asking if he was feeling overly stressed. Leo stammered, admitting his anxiety, and Sabina understood, saying that being tense for one's first mission was completely normal. However, she immediately posed a critical question, whether a gentle person like him had the courage to strike down another in a life-or-death battle. Sabina analyzed that Kazan was a ruthless pragmatist, while Leo tended to overthink, a comparison intended to help Leo recognize his weaknesses and the need to become more decisive. Sabina gently comforted Leo, advising him not to doubt himself because she was the one who most fully understood the efforts he'd invested over the past 3 years. With a confident smile, she affirmed that after all, she was the one who had trained him, and that was a guarantee of Leo's capability. As the train approached Baron Bellis's territory, Sabina suggested that for this mission, they address each other as master and disciple, a way to maintain secrecy and also bolster Leo's morale. Leo happily agreed, repeating the title master with a mischievous smile, clearly enjoying this new form of address. Sabina suddenly moved to the window and declared that she would leave first to avoid detection, despite Rohan's alarmed reminder that the train was still traveling at high speed. Ignoring the warnings, she began climbing out and only managed to tell Rohan from now on to call her Lady Sabina, causing him to scream in terror, while Kazan calmly commented on the master's boldness. Sabina reassured Rohan not to worry too much because her 2 grandchildren would be nearby watching, and no one could hold him responsible. Without hesitation, she launched herself out of the moving train, leaving behind a chaotic scene that made both Leo and Rohan scream in alarm. They only had time to call out, "Lady Sabina," in utter horror as her figure disappeared into the wind. Rohan and Leo stood frozen, their faces pale with shock, unable to believe what had just happened right before their eyes. After Sabina's dramatic departure, Rohan could only clutch his head, silently lamenting why everyone in the Reston family was so strange. Meanwhile, at the Bellis territory, the Baron was struggling with a severe cough. His health deteriorated after the battle with the mountain bandits. Upon meeting, the Baron apologized for having to receive the two young masters in poor health, but Leo politely inquired about his wound. He reassured them that he had passed the critical stage and even recalled the memory of meeting Kazan and his father, Phi, 10 years ago. Leo seemed very proud to be praised for having grown remarkably mature, while Kazan frankly suggested speaking naturally because he was not used to complicated formalities. Rohan quickly proposed a more familiar form of address than "Young Master Kazan," and he happily agreed because it made him feel more comfortable. The Marquis remarked that being assigned the first mission proved that Kazan had reached 4 stars at a very young age, and he did not hesitate to confirm this, conveniently teasing his cousin Leo who was still at 3 stars. He continued that the main family must highly value the talents of the two of them to have sent them here, a comment that surprised Leo. And for that reason, he felt uneasy entrusting such a dangerous mission to 2 promising young men. Kazan immediately responded firmly that he understood the Marquis' concern, but if they failed, they would disgrace the pride of Lam Lang, so they had no intention of failing. Kazan turned to seek agreement from his cousin, and Leo, though still confused, quickly joined in, affirming that they would definitely complete the mission. The Marquis laughed at the confidence of the 2 young men, but a coughing fit made Rohan worry about his father's health. Seeing that the Marquis needed rest, Kazan promptly asked permission to take his leave, and the Marquis placed his full trust in the 2 young masters. Before they left, the Marquis mentioned that he had already arranged for a guide, and Kazan agreed immediately without any hesitation. Amid the majestic and chilly snowy mountains, Leo called out to Kazan, as if something was troubling him. As the 3 of them followed the guide, Kazan teased, asking if Leo was already tired. Leo ignored the teasing and instead expressed his doubts as to whether they could truly trust this so-called herbal doctor. He went on to analyze that there was no guarantee the guide wasn't a member of the bandits, and Kazan just scoffed, praising his cousin for finally using his brain. Kazan calmly confirmed Leo's suspicions were correct, that the guide was very likely part of the bandit gang, leaving Leo shocked and wondering how he could know such a thing. He revealed that he learned this from a conversation with Rohan when they first arrived at the station, a plan that had been arranged beforehand without Leo's knowledge. Back at the station, Kazan had asked Rohan about the plan to hunt down the bandits' hideout, a question that made the young Marquis hesitate slightly. Rohan explained that they had no other choice but to exploit a traitor within the territory, and Kazan merely smirked meaningfully at this approach. Returning to the present, Leo angrily demanded why Kazan hadn't told him about this plan earlier. Kazan casually replied that it was because his cousin had been overly tense all day, implying that Leo wouldn't be able to perform convincingly if he knew the truth in advance. Leo silently admired Rohan's cunningness for daring to bring a traitor along with them, and Kazan agreed that keeping a spy nearby to use him against his own comrades was an extremely effective tactic. He went on to explain that the fact the Marquis had to resort to this last resort showed they were desperate, and this was the perfect opportunity for 2 noble young masters like them to become tempting bait. With a confident smile, Kazan realized that it seemed they had bitten the bait and were ready to spring the trap. As predicted, a band of robbers suddenly appeared from the forest, blocking the path and surrounding the guide. The leader approached and handed Sven, the guide, a reward pouch for successfully luring the 2 little rich boys into the trap. One robber observed the 2 men's attitudes, then turned to report to the boss that they didn't look like the type who would obediently submit to being tied up. Kazan, with cold eyes and a contemptuous smile, stood in front of Leo and called the robbers filthy vermin. His eyes flared with a blue magical aura as he growled angrily, declaring he would not forgive anyone who dared to traffic drugs within his father's territory. At the same time, in Bellis territory, the old Marquis' hoarse cough echoed again, signaling the fragility of the situation. Rohan anxiously inquired about his father's health, and the old man could only weakly reply that he was still all right. He hurriedly handed his father a glass of water, a small gesture filled with the concern and worry of a son. The silent moment between father and son revealed the burden and helplessness they felt facing the dire situation of their domain. Looking out the window, Rohan couldn't help but feel anxious, wondering if the two young heirs were truly managing well in this dangerous mission. The Marquis reassured his son that the Blue Sea Fortress sending them out without much information proved the Reston family had complete trust in the abilities of the two boys, especially the one named Kazan. He remarked that Kazan reminded him of the young Duke Halo, not only in appearance but also in his confident, composed, and gallant manner. Finally, the Marquis affirmed that they could place full hope in the two young men, and Rohan agreed with his father's assessment. The battle began with a bloody scene, the white snow stained red by the unfortunate souls who fell beneath Kazan's sword. Surrounded by a blue magical aura, Kazan charged into the enemy's encirclement, their desperate screams echoing in vain. With glowing eyes and a proud smile, he effortlessly defeated them one by one, turning the battlefield into his own stage. Watching from afar, Leo could only stand in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the devastating power of his cousin as he witnessed the slaughter unfold before him. Sven, the treacherous guide, lay gasping on the ground, and in his final moments, he managed to utter only 2 words, "monster," before breathing his last. Sven's words struck like a bolt from the blue, forcing Leo to shockingly admit the harsh truth that Kazan was indeed a monster. A robber, fortunately surviving the terrifying attack, stood pale-faced with fear. He hurriedly advised his boss that these were no ordinary opponents and that they should retreat to report back to the main unit. The ringleader gritted his teeth, unable to accept the fact that he was being overwhelmed by a mere child. He roared in anger that he would never lose to a kid still wet behind the ears, then charged forward to deliver one final reckless attack. Though seriously wounded, the ringleader stubbornly stood up and shouted that he would show Kazan his true strength. He channeled all the remaining magic power in his body, his entire being blazing with a hateful red glow, preparing to unleash the finishing blow. Yet, faced with this desperate attack, Kazan merely stood coldly and watched, silently thinking how ridiculous his opponent's actions were. With glowing eyes, he uttered just one word, "noisy," expressing absolute disdain for his foe. With a single sword stroke descending from above his head, Kazan neatly and mercilessly ended the ringleader's life. The ringleader collapsed onto the white snow, bringing the confrontation to a swift close. Kazan merely flicked his sword lightly, complaining that the bandit's blood had stained his clothes, an expression cold enough to be terrifying. Meanwhile, Leo suddenly realized in shock that he had drawn his silpid sword without even noticing. He silently thought that Kazan's strength was one thing, but there was something even more frightening. That was the aura of sword energy radiating from the decisive blade, a terrifying pressure that made him feel completely engulfed. Leo was still in shock, feeling as though his throat could be cut at any moment by the sword energy emanating from Kazan. Faced with such overwhelming power, the bandit finally could no longer endure and hurriedly raised his hands, begging for mercy. Kazan approached with a friendly expression, asked the bandit's name, and the trembling man replied that his name was Yura. With a cunning smile, Kazan asked Yura if he had a rope, and the man immediately obeyed, not daring to refuse. Kazan ordered him to bring the rope over, a request that left Leo standing beside him feeling uneasy. Shortly afterward, not only the bandit but also the 2 young masters were tied up. Leo couldn't understand and questioned Kazan why they also had to tie themselves up like that. He continued wondering if it was really necessary for Yura to carry the weapons of both of them. Kazan explained that in order to play the bait convincingly and find their lair, they couldn't just wander around armed to the teeth. He added that only in this way would the story of the 2 boys being captured and escorted away by a man become believable. Kazan decided to extract more information from the prisoner on the way and called out loudly to Yura, startling him. He asked directly whether they were deserters, and Yura, though surprised, honestly confessed that they used to belong to the 3rd Infantry Division of the Kingdom of Cass. Leo realized they came from the southern battlefield, and Kazan continued to inquire about the number of people in the bandit group. Yura revealed that they had a total of 130 members, including a mage and 2 escort knights, information that caught Kazan's particular attention. Hearing the number 130 deserters, Yura broke out in a cold sweat, silently cursing his bad luck for having fallen into the hands of such extraordinary nobles. He recalled Kazan's glowing blue eyes and realized these were certainly descendants of the Reston family, the heart of the Oria's empire. Leo continued the interrogation, asking why a bunch of deserters from the south would travel all the way to this remote north. Yura explained that their commander had promised to help them earn enough money to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. However, Kazan sensed something unusual, because a lowly infantry unit having a mage as an escort, and a money-driven band choosing a poverty-stricken territory as their stronghold, didn't add up. Kazan looked ahead, his eyes full of thought as he realized that this story was somehow illogical. Yura informed the two young masters that their stronghold was right before their eyes. Kazan merely smirked, thinking quietly that he would soon get to see what was Southwest special about this place. The guards on the watchtower had spotted their presence. One guard asked why Yura was bringing a hostage along, and Yura brusquely ordered him to shut up. However, they kept questioning, wondering why only Yura had returned and what the weapons on his back were about. Yura continued his act, boasting that this was a feat he had achieved alone, while the others were off chasing the two boys' escorts. He ordered them to open the main gate, and despite some suspicion, the guard had to comply. As the three of them stepped inside, another guard sneered, asking if Yura was excited because this was the first time their boss had praised him. Another complained that if Yura had brought the hostage back sooner, things would have gone much smoother. Faced with these jibes, Yura could only glare angrily and demand that they shut up. Just stepping inside, Kazan remarked that Yura was weak, nothing like a real bandit. Immediately, he sensed a terrifying dark power radiating from deep within the base. Yura admitted he had felt a chill ever since, and Kazan's decisive slashing blade was also reacting violently. Leo suddenly called out to Kazan in alarm when he spotted something horrifying ahead. All three looked up and fell silent upon seeing a gruesome sacrificial object hanging from a tall pole. It was the corpse of a gigantic crow brutally nailed up, an unmistakable sign of a dark ritual. At the base of the pole, a massive magical circle glowed fiercely red, and Kazan immediately recognized it as dark magic. The magical circle grew more intense as dark energy streams began to pour out, signaling a dreadful event about to unfold. A gigantic shadow started to rise from the matrix, and Kazan quickly ordered Yura to cut the ropes binding him. While Yura was still fumbling, Kazan turned and shouted for Leo to draw the silpid blade in preparation for the upcoming battle. He handed the silpid blade to Leo, saying he would soon need it, a mysterious warning that left Leo curious. Immediately, from the magical circle, dozens of dry skeletons armed with weapons began to rise amid a sea of glowing red energy. Yura let out a terrified scream, while Leo stood frozen before the summoned army of restless spirits. A battalion of 13 skeletal warriors had formed, ready to charge the three at any moment. From above, the leader's voice echoed, mocking that the hostages had willingly trapped themselves. He stood alongside a group of archers, arrogantly welcoming them to his mountain stronghold. With a haughty gaze, he looked down at the two little spoiled princes, fully confident in his battle formation. However, Kazan remained calm and observant, realizing that he could not see the black sorcerer anywhere. Surely, he was hiding somewhere to cast a spell. In an unexpected move, Kazan grabbed Yura, pressed his sword to his neck, and declared that if they dared attack, he would slit this man's throat. Leo was completely shocked by his cousin's hostage-taking action, shouting in protest about the honor of a nobleman. The leader stood on high ground, confidently looking down at the battlefield that had been set with archers and an army of skeletons. He sneered at Kazan's hostage-taking, saying that a nobleman must value honor above all else. Kazan coldly replied, "So what?" Not aloud, while Yura, the one with the sword pressed against his neck, could only stammer out, "Young master," in fear. The leader laughed scornfully, saying that while Kazan was interesting, he was mistaken, because a hostage without value was completely meaningless. He declared that Yura was utterly useless, and Kazan could do whatever he wanted with him. Kazan lowered his sword and nonchalantly remarked that Yura really was useless, leaving him only able to fumble out apologies. Seeing the hostage plan fail and the enemy forces overwhelming, Leo anxiously asked Kazan if he had any other plans. Kazan turned to his cousin with a confident and mysterious smile, then calmly answered, "Of course." He revealed his plan, which was very simple but also bold. All they needed to do was take down the commander, and it would be over. Kazan's eyes flashed with a blue magical aura, signaling that a direct attack was about to erupt. The leader was stunned when he recognized the blue magical aura, the distinctive mark of the Reston clan, and he knew he had encountered something he shouldn't have. Kazan turned to Leo and told him to handle the skeletons, a suggestion that left Leo very puzzled. He quickly clarified his intention, declaring that he would single-handedly deal with the commander, as his body radiated a strong azure magical aura. Having said that, Kazan unleashed magic beneath his feet, using the force to propel himself straight into the air, lunging toward the leader. Leo was now left completely alone, facing an entire army of armed skeletons charging toward him. He watched Kazan's departing back and screamed inwardly, "Kazan, what the hell are you thinking?" Leo was utterly panicked, unable to understand how he alone could stand against such a vast legion of undead spirits. Seeing Kazan charging forward, the leader hastily ordered the archers to open fire. But it was too late. Kazan unleashed the Hai Lang sword technique, creating a wave of sword energy that swept through the guards on the fortress walls. The leader could only curse helplessly as Kazan descended from above, preparing for a finishing blow. Kazan landed in front of the leader and disdainfully called him a nuisance. Without a moment's hesitation, he swung his sword, and in the blink of an eye, the man's right hand was severed. The leader could only kneel and scream in pain, completely defeated. Kazan coldly said that if he intended to attack, he should have done it a little faster. He couldn't believe why the Blue Sea Fortress would intervene in this matter, and Kazan explained that it was because this territory was right next to his father's domain. He reassured him, saying not to worry, he wouldn't kill him but would just take him back to the fortress for interrogation. Meanwhile, down in the courtyard, Leo was fighting alone bravely amid the encirclement of the skeletons. Watching from above, Kazan smirked slightly, silently acknowledging that his cousin was not bad at all. He even shouted loudly, cheering for Leo to use the power of the Sea Lantern sword to crush them. Then, Kazan turned back to the leader and coldly asked his name, signaling that the interrogation was about to begin. The leader, though trembling with fear, confessed his name was Michael Knox. Without giving him a chance to react, Kazan plunged the execution blade straight into Michael's leg. Michael could only scream in excruciating pain at the ruthless blow. With a devilish smile, Kazan ordered him to tell his men to lower their weapons. Reluctantly, the guards obeyed, throwing down their weapons in anger. Kazan appeared satisfied, saying that he liked this obedience. But Michael did not give up. He warned that even as a member of the Reston family, Kazan would not be able to withstand the forces that were coming. Kazan replied coldly, seeming as if he was still waiting for something. You sarcastically asked if he was waiting for the Dark Mage, while Leo was behind finishing off the last skeletons. Just as Leo noticed that the magic circle had disappeared, Kazan delivered a final remark, asking Michael if he really thought their clan had sent only 2 children here. As Kazan said, a thunderous explosion echoed from afar, and Leo realized that, of course, they had a protector accompanying them. Sabina's voice rang out, scolding them that it was because of those 2 that she had wasted time and let the Dark Mage escape. Sabina appeared with full authority, holding the severed head of the Dark Mage they had just defeated. With sharp eyes, she looked straight at her 2 students, preparing to give a debrief on the mission. Leo and Yura quickly greeted their master, and she called their names seriously. Sabina declared that this mission was a failure because they had missed the most important piece of evidence, which made Kazan angrily kick the leader away. She remarked that Kazan's way of recklessly rushing into danger was exactly like her older brother. However, she also acknowledged that it was a quality well suited to someone from the Reston clan. Still, Sabina did not forget to deduct points from Kazan for his sudden staged hostage kidnapping scheme. She looked down at the mage's head and then turned to ask Kazan why he had come up with that kidnapping stunt. Kazan explained that he wanted to attack their blind spot, because no one would suspect a noble to kidnap hostages, and Sabina had to agree with this point. She laughed, saying she had never seen anyone like Kazan, truly a madman, and he simply thanked her calmly, while the leader silently thought that the Reston kids were indeed crazy. Sabina declared that they would return to Lord Bellis's castle because she had many questions to ask. Michael Knox, the leader, could only lie there in despair and fear. His mind was occupied by a single thought: these Reston kids were truly mad. After quelling the chaos, they proceeded to the detention area and rescued the kidnapped villagers. Tearful reunions began as a father found his lost son, Isabel. He embraced his child tightly, crying and apologizing for failing to protect him, while the child also sobbed in fear. Watching that scene from a distance, Yura remained silent, speechless. Kazan turned to look at Yura, who was staring downcast, then smirked and asked if he was feeling guilty now. Kazan continued teasing Yura, saying that being thrown into the Baron's prison might actually be a bargain. He announced that Yura would have to go to the Blue Sea Fortress along with his boss, news that left him in great panic. Sabina wondered why Kazan hadn't tied Yura up, worrying that he might try to escape. He explained that they still needed someone to carry that guy to the fortress since he was too badly injured to walk on his own. Kazan patted Yura on the shoulder, smiling as he said that even so, they shouldn't let down their guard too much, a gesture both friendly and laced with a threat. At that moment, a rescued villager timidly stepped forward and asked whether Yura would be punished. Kazan affirmed that technically he was still a bandit, and the villagers mustered all their courage to speak up in defense of Yura. He recounted how Yura had genuinely cared for them during captivity, secretly bringing medicine to the sick and giving his own food to others. The villagers all pleaded for mercy on his behalf, and Sabina turned to ask Kazan's opinion. After a moment's thought, Kazan decided to grant him temporary clemency, given that he had guided them to the bandits' stronghold. Yura was so moved that tears fell, vowing to serve the young master loyally for life, but Kazan just reminded him not to let his guard down. At that time, Leo called down from the upper floor, saying that Kazan should come and see this. Kazan and Yura went upstairs, where Leo was already waiting. He pointed to a room and asked Kazan to look inside. Kazan's gaze was immediately drawn to a box emitting a mysterious blue light. He stepped closer, utterly astonished at what he saw inside. It was a container filled with mana stones, a precious resource and the real reason for the bandits' presence. After cleaning up, they escorted the remaining bandits back to the territory, much to the joy and satisfaction of the villagers. Amidst the cheerful atmosphere, Leo turned to ask Kazan if the Baron would host a feast for them. However, Kazan was lost in thought about the mana stone mine, prompting Leo to irritably ask if he was even listening. Kazan silently thought that as predicted, there was a legitimate reason why such a large bandit group was hiding in Baron Bellis's remote mountain region. His eyes gleamed with greed as he considered the enormous profits this mana stone mine could yield, an expression that made Leo beside him uneasy. Leo anxiously asked, "What are you scheming now?" upon seeing Kazan's familiar sly smile. Sabina announced that the young Lord Rohan had arrived to welcome them. Rohan warmly greeted everyone's return and ordered the guards to imprison the captured bandits. Sabina informed Rohan that they would be bringing along the bandit leader, and he quickly agreed. Rohan hinted that he wanted to make a request, but Sabina skillfully declined, saying she was merely the guardian and he should speak with her apprentices. Rohan invited the two to dine and talk, but Kazan flatly refused, saying they had to return to the fortress immediately. Rejected, Rohan had no choice but to get straight to the point, saying it was about the payment for this mission. He explained that their domain currently could not afford to pay and wished to postpone the payment, a proposal that made Kazan smile slyly with cunning intent. Seizing the opportunity, Kazan began his negotiation by saying he had wondered why the bandits chose a remote place like the Bellis domain as their base. He bluntly criticized the place for having no outstanding specialties, essentially just a backwater village, a remark that made Rohan struggle to contain his anger. Kazan revealed that what they were actually after was something else, and presented a magic stone in front of Rohan's astonished eyes. He asserted that there was a magic stone mine in their domain, a fact unknown even to the Nam-Baron family. Having created a perfect leverage, Kazan officially stated that he wanted to make a proposal. The proposal was to cooperate with the Blue Sea Fortress to develop this magic stone mine. On the condition that the Blue Sea Fortress would provide the initial capital and security forces, a bold proposal that left Rohan stunned, wondering if this kid really knew what he was talking about. Rohan quickly did the math in his head and realized that having a powerful family like Reston holding shares in their mine would bring enormous benefits. He realized that perhaps Kazan had calculated all of this, but still couldn't understand who had given this kid the nerve to negotiate such a major issue on his own. Kazan launched his final move, saying that if the project were approved, the Seaside Knights could be stationed here, boosting the economy and solving defense problems in no time. Cornered, Rohan had no choice but to ask directly how many shares of the mine the Duke wanted. Kazan skillfully dodged, saying that it was something Rohan should discuss with his father, as a child like him was not qualified to talk about business details. Rohan understood and agreed to discuss it with his father, and Kazan promised to get back to him soon. That night, Sabina seemed quite pleased with the performance of her two students. Leo saw his master standing alone under the moonlight and called out to her. He curiously asked why she had said things could get complicated when they were at the bandits' hideout. Sabina raised the bag in her hand, saying it was because of this guy, and Leo immediately guessed that it was the dark mage she had defeated. She explained that this guy was not just some random dark mage. Sabina revealed his real identity as Ted Delhana, a second-class wanted criminal in the Empire and a sixth-rank dark mage, information that surprised Kazan greatly. She continued to scold them, saying that a second-class fugitive was rampaging in Imperial territory, yet the two of them were only busy dealing with small fries and failed to recognize such an important matter. Sabina continued her lecture, saying that people can only grow stronger by fighting powerful opponents, and if they had taken down the Dark Sorcerer first, they wouldn't have wasted time on the weaklings. She concluded that this was why she considered the mission a failure, and reminded Kazan to keep this lesson in mind. Meanwhile, Leo felt sidelined as the conversation seemed to focus solely on Kazan. Suddenly, Sabina called out Leo's name, startling him into quickly responding. Contrary to the criticisms directed at Kazan, she praised Leo for performing better than she expected, especially since this was his first encounter with a spirit. She advised him to be more confident in himself, and Leo responded with firm determination. At the same time, at the Blue Sea Fortress, important news was announced: the Lord had returned. Duke Halo was welcomed by his subordinates and immediately asked if anything unusual had happened. Herrick reported that the young masters Leo and Kazan were on their way back from the mission with Miss Sabina. Suddenly, a person rushed over in panic, loudly calling the Lord's name, signaling that an urgent incident had just occurred. The flustered subordinate hurried over, delivering an urgent letter from the royal palace, news that left Duke Halo visibly surprised. He took the letter with a skeptical expression because His Majesty had said nothing before he left the capital. But when he opened the letter, his eyes widened in astonishment at its contents. It was a personal summons from the Emperor himself, inviting his grandson, Kazan, to the capital. Shortly after, an express train departed overnight, carrying our main characters to the heart of the Empire. Inside the train carriage, Kazan sat alone, his eyes gazing thoughtfully out the window, reflecting on this sudden and unexpected journey.